Good afternoon, everybody. And welcome to the 2017 Jesuit University's Humanitarian Action Network Conference, focused on the theme of Principles in Crisis, Refugees and Responsibility. My name is Michelle Sturck-Barrett, and I'm the director of the Donlin Office of Community-Based Learning here at the College of the Holy Cross. Together with Maddie Carroll, Sahara Hassan, Isabel Jenkins, and Dennis Kennedy, I've been one of the on-campus coordinators of this conference. We have a terrific lineup of speakers and activities in store for you during the next few days. The conference program has been designed to provide you both theoretical and practical wisdom that will enable you to better discern how you might ethically respond to global humanitarian issues, particularly the crisis currently facing refugees and migrants, through your personal, academic, and professional choices. We truly hope that you get a lot out of this wonderful opportunity, as there's a wealth of knowledge among those participating in the conference. So thank you for choosing to spend nearly a week of your summer here with us here at Holy Cross.
I'm Dennis Kennedy. I teach political science. I direct peace and conflict studies, and it is a pleasure also to welcome you here today. I want to mention that the kernels for this conference were planted 2 years ago at John Carroll University when we participated, and I know a number of you did as well, in JUHAN 2015. And having spent the last 2 years helping organize this conference, I have a lot of respect for what Rich Clark at John Carroll was able to put on. We saw this 2017 conference as a way not only to showcase opportunities at Holy Cross and in Worcester, but also and especially to build communities of scholarship and practice on issues of humanitarian concern. We decided to focus the conference on refugees and responsibility for the very simple reason that today over 65 million people are displaced. They've been forced to flee their homes. I'm sad to say that intervening political events have only increased the urgency of our task. Even beyond magnitude and politics, we strongly believe that refugees provide a bridge between humanitarian events that can seem quite distant and those who would seek to respond to human suffering. This is very much the case in Worcester, as I suspect our keynotes will discuss a little bit. The distant is in fact quite proximate. We have the largest refugee community in Massachusetts in Worcester. We have important opportunities thereby to facilitate the kinds of empathy that are glaringly absent from our political discourses right now. I hope you find the conference inspiring, educational, occasionally even provocative. I hope you'll attend some sessions that are outside of your comfort zone. I hope you'll talk to people that you don't know, and I hope you'll share your experiences and your passions. Above all, I hope you'll reflect critically on the issues that are raised and what you witness in the various sessions. So thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isabel Jenkins, as Michelle said, and I'm the Associate Director of the Donlin Office, and I've been planning the conference with Michelle and Dennis and Maddie and Sahara for the past 16 months, I think. So it's so exciting to see it come to fruition. You probably recognize me by my email address, so thank you for reading all of the emails and for showing up. And you'll see me throughout the week making lots of announcements about many different things, so bear with me as I do that. But I want to use this time right now to share a little bit about who we are as a group in this room. So we are undergraduates, graduate students, professors, community partners, refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers, and friends. We come from several Jesuit schools, including Loyola Maryland, Georgetown, Scranton, Fairfield, Fordham, Loyola Marymount, St. John's, St. Joe's, John Carroll, Boston College, Loyola New Orleans, Marquette, Lemoyne, University of San Francisco, and College of the Holy Cross. We come from colleges and universities in the region, including Assumption College, Providence College, and Manhattan Community College. And we work for national and international humanitarian organizations and nonprofits, including Oxfam, Books Not Bombs, the Kino Border Initiative, Jesuit Refugee Service USA, and Jesuit Refugee Service Canada, Doctors Without Borders, Ignatian Solidarity Network, and Catholic Relief Services. And we also represent local organizations who are working to settle and support refugees, immigrants, and those seeking asylum right here in Worcester. So we have Worcester Alliance for Refugee Ministries, the Refugee and Immigrant Assistance Center, Family Diversity Projects, Catholic Charities Worcester, Refugee Artisans of Worcester, Hadwin Park Congregational Church, and the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. So we are a great group, we're diverse, we're committed, we're engaged, and we're united here with the shared purpose to learn about humanitarianism, to think about how we collectively can and should respond to the current refugee crisis, and to grow together in the sharing of our scholarship and practice. So welcome, I'm so glad you all are all here. And I'm going to turn it over right now to our two JUHAN fellows who Michelle mentioned, Maddie and Sahara. Come up. They're going to introduce themselves and then introduce our first keynote today, Miss Ava Millona. And as they're walking up, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge the both of them. They've been working behind the scenes and on the front lines to spread the word of JUHAN, to plan and implement the conference, and they've been doing such a great job. So we have to give them a round of applause. And I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sahara Hassan, and I am a JUHAN Fellow. I am a junior at Holy Cross, and I study international studies and social justice.
Hi, my name is Maddie Carroll. I'm also a JUHAN Fellow. I'm a junior at Holy Cross, and I study Spanish, education, and Latin American and Latino studies. It is now our great pleasure to introduce to you Ava Millona. Ms. Millona is the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, also known as MIRA, which is Massachusetts' largest organization representing the foreign-born. She is also co-chair of the National Partnership for New Americans, the lead national organization focusing on immigrant integration. She joined MIRA in 1999 and served as Director of Policy and Advocacy and as Deputy Director before becoming Executive Director in 2008. Prior to MIRA, Ms. Millona directed the Refugee Resettlement Program in Central Massachusetts.
In her native Albania, she practiced civil and criminal law, serving on Tirana's District Court from 1989 to 1992 as the youngest district judge ever appointed. Ms. Millona is also the co-chair of the Governor's Advocacy Council on Refugees and Immigrants, and serves on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She's the recipient of over a dozen major awards, including the prestigious 2009 USCIS Outstanding American by Choice Award, the 2010 Wainwright Social Justice Award, and the 2011 and 2012 Power Meter Award, presented to the most influential people for Latinos in Massachusetts. Please join us in welcoming Ava Millona to the stage.
Thank you so much to both of you for the generous and kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you on the Principles in Crisis, Refugee and Responsibility Conference. First, I wanted to thank the leaders for putting together this conference and for all of you for your presence today and for what you do every day. So thank you so very much. So the theme of the conference could not come at a more appropriate time in our country. Not long ago, only 2 weeks ago, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees reported that there were 65.6 million displaced persons in the world in 2016, really a stunning new record for the post-war era. That number includes 22.5 million people who have been forced out of their countries by persecution, war, and violence. About half of those are children. Many have been living in refugee camps for years, desperately hoping to be resettled to a safe place where they can start a new life. Yet last year, less than 1% of the refugees, about 189,000, were resettled. The United States, which has a long and proud history of being a haven for refugees, welcomed almost 85,000 refugees last year, more than any other country. But recently, at the mid-90s, we're taking more than 100,000 per year. and in the early 80s, over 200,000 per year. And right now, at a time of global crisis, we should be doing much more. Indeed, President Obama had recognized that and raised the cap for 2017 to 110,000, but President Trump has different priorities. We also need to remember that ignoring refugees is not going to solve the problem. It's not going to make them disappear. Someone has to help them. The vast majority of refugees never make it to Europe or to the United States. They stay in the nearest safe places when they can go. So for all the new news reports about desperate people landing in Italy and in Greece, it's Turkey that has the largest number of refugees and asylum seekers in the world. In 2016, that number was 2.9 million, and almost 1 for every 25 residents. Pakistan, it's number 2 with 1.4 million, and Uganda, where the gross national income per capita is less than 1,700,000, is hosting more than 1 million refugees. As Eric Swartz, the president of Refugee International, put it in Washington Post last week, it's poor countries, not rich ones, who bear the brunt of responsibility of providing safe haven for refugees. Yet, despite their lack of resources, some of these nations are doing an extraordinary job to an extent that the most privileged parts of the world to shame. And yet, in the richest country in the world, we complain about the burden of refugees. President Trump issued an executive order to limit the entries of refugees to 50,000 per year and tried to suspend the refugee program entirely for 120 days, which could set thousands of applications back by years. And yesterday, the US Supreme Court granted a stay on court injunctions that had blocked the order, accepting only persons that have an existing bona fide relationship with a person or an entity here in the United States. So at least for the immediate future, President Trump's rejection to basic human rights principles in the name of national security will prevail. That is heartbreaking. We're shrinking our responsibility as a global leader and ignoring the human consequences. Politicians and other voices advocating for these harsh policies build support by fueling racism and xenophobia. We are seeing this not only in the United States, we're seeing this in Europe as well. In Britain, the Brexit vote was driven in large by anti-immigrant sentiment. The recent French presidential election saw a runoff that included Marine Le Pen, leader of the anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim National Front. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who showed courageous leadership at the time of the most vulnerable crisis, also is facing vicious opposition. I wish I could say that this is an unprecedented in our country, wholly un-American, but the truth is we have submitted to racism and xenophobia before. Here in Massachusetts, we were extremely hostile to the notion of the Catholic immigration in the middle of 19th century. Our nation once all banned Chinese immigration after we were done with the Chinese building our railroads. And also we turned away Jewish refugees. Our recent history had its own mood swings. Under the Obama administration, we saw the highest number of people being deported from our country. And also we saw that the Immigration and Custom Enforcement detained and deported many families and children coming from the Triangle, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Many of them faced death upon their return. However, our nation's record with immigration was not all that bad. The Obama administration increased the number of refugees, increased the efforts to better integrate immigrants and refugees into the fabric of our country. For the first time in the US history, we saw an executive order in 2014 that called for a national strategy to better include immigrants and refugees into the fabric of our country. Here in Massachusetts, and especially here in Worcester, which is my hometown for over 20 years, we have a very proud history of welcoming immigrants and refugees. Last year, our Commonwealth received more than 2,400 refugees from 46 countries, in almost 2 decades. A third were under the age of 18. Over 950,000 came from Middle East and South Asia, with significant arrivals from Iraq, Syria, and Bhutan. Another 760 refugees came from Africa, including a large number from Somalia. Over the past several years, Worcester has been the most significant receiving community for new refugees, accepting a quarter of the state total, more than any other city. I would like to take a moment and thank the agencies such as Central Care Alliance, Catholic Charities, the Refugee Immigrant and Assistance Center, and a couple of other groups that I heard are in the room for their enormous effort and for the wonderful work that they have done to resettle these refugees. The hardships that your communities face every day are really present, and you are dealing with immigrants and refugees who have been through enough trauma. So what you're doing, it's noble. And I do thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that you do. Refugees, and indeed all immigrants, face a number of challenges in trying to adjust their lives in the United States. But one of the biggest challenges that they face is the ability to communicate with members of the receiving community in order to go their day-to-day lives. Studies have consistently shown that learning to speak English is key to improving access to employment, education, and health services. Indeed, there is a direct correlation between English proficiency and refugee satisfaction level. This has been a particular problem in Worcester, as 54% of our foreign-born population reports that they speak English less than very well, compared to a statewide average of 45%. Refugees want to learn English, and there is an enormous demand for English classes for adults, but there are simply not enough spots available. We are pleased for the effort that are being done in the Massachusetts legislature to really secure funds for adult basic education and English classes, about $1.3 million increase over the past year. Immigrants and refugees in Massachusetts face other challenges when it comes to education. Educational opportunities can vary widely in the countries where refugees come from. This is complicated by the fact that for some, a lack of education opportunity might be symptomatic of the persecution that leads one to become a refugee. In other cases where countries suffer from violence and conflict, the breakdown of government institutions is reflected in the breakdown of educational institutions. It's also common for young people to spend many months and years out of school after their families are displaced by a disaster or conflict. While the international organizations that run refugee camps do their best to provide opportunities for education, limited resources and social and psychological stresses of living in a refugee camp can severely erode the effectiveness of any educational opportunities. MIRA organizes a lobby day every year, and we had over 1,000 people this year advocating for programs that fund our agencies. And we met an entire class of students this year from Charlestown High School, whose education has been disrupted by forced migration. Some were several years behind in their schooling, even though they were in the mid to late teens. If we want these young people to succeed in America, we need to help them catch up and not become disheartened as they work hard to gain skill and knowledge that they need. They require skilled dedication, and we are really fortunate here in Worcester and in Massachusetts to have talented teachers who are working with them and helping them to succeed. We also recognize that adults coming here as refugees may need to play catch up as well. Even if they are high skilled, they may be used to very different systems, the ways that they worked. Some may need to learn new technologies, and some will need to learn English, not just the basic vocabulary, but how to communicate about construction, about health or business in whatever field that they're in. The Boston Globe had a beautiful story a few weeks ago about a Syrian tailor, a man with exquisite skills and huge challenges he faced finding a job because of English barrier. Helping refugees overcome these hurdles so they can become self-sufficient and successful, it's a significant challenge for resettlement agencies. But the reward for our economy and our society is a fresh infusion of talent, of energy, and entrepreneurship. Adults who had the opportunity to achieve high degrees of education in their home countries face other hurdles here in the US, and often those are but impossible to overcome. Credentialing is a constant challenge for those who come here with professional degrees. Often, someone needs to graduate from high school in order to take an exam or take a certification. This can have massive, massive impact on the earning capacity of foreign-born. For instance, Department of Labor statistics for 2013 showed that the average annual salary for a nurse in the Worcester area is nearly $90,000. In contrast, the annual salary for a nursing assistant is just above $31,000. In other words, for an immigrant who was a nurse in their home country and cannot even access the credentialing process here, the gap is about $60,000 in difference in salary. So this income disparity holds true across Worcester population. Native-born earn 22% more than the foreign-born counterparts. For women, it is a 27% difference in annual earning. So we are currently working with our state legislators to provide and find innovative ways to increase opportunities for immigrants and refugees and others for professional degrees to make sure that they're using their skills and they're performing in the areas that they are trained. And also refugees themselves are determined. They are persistent. So think about it. Many have lost everything they had. All have left their homes, their friends, their communities, whatever remains of them, because staying at home was no longer an option. So they venture out into the unknown, sometimes at enormous risk, and try to build a new life in whichever country they land. Many spend years, often decades, in the overcrowded refugee camps, enduring disease and deprivation. By the time they reach us, they've proven their resilience over and over. And of course, they are vulnerable. You cannot endure so much trauma and not have it hurt you. But their strength drives them forward. One thing I hope you can all commit yourselves today is to ensure that in America, refugees don't face new traumas. Muslims in particular increasingly face harassment and hostility, sometimes physical violence. Unfortunately, we are not immune here in Massachusetts. What we have seen Hispanics physically assault simply because they are Hispanic. Muslim communities in Merrimack Valley being subject to harassment, and just a few days ago, a 62-year-old woman being verbally assaulted on the T by a man who continually shouted, "She's a Muslim, she has a bomb." It is our responsibility as Americans and as decent human beings to stand up to the hatred, to make it clear that we will not tolerate it, and we will shun and punish anyone who perpetrates it. We are very grateful in our Commonwealth to have the Attorney General Maura Healey, who immediately after the elections, presidential elections, established a hotline to report such incident of hate. And we are grateful to the local and state federal officials who have worked hand to hand to establish trust among communities. Perhaps the most heartening thing that I have seen in aftermath of last year's election has been the way various groups, immigrants, refugees, environmental groups, LGBT community, and others have come together to support each other. Last week, after the horrific murder of the 17-year-old Nabra Hassan in Virginia, I stood with hundreds of people together, standing in solidarity in Copley Square in Boston. People of all backgrounds offering their love and support to their Muslim brothers and sisters. Similar vigils were held in multiple cities in the US. So I invite all of you in this room to stand together as well. I invite you to recognize the power that you have to change the lives, to change how others see them and how they see themselves. So if you ask the question, what can we all do? I'll give you a couple of thoughts. First, we can make it clear to our elected officials that we support refugee resettlement, that we see refugees not as a threat, but as our brothers and sisters. Tell the governor, your governors from all of you in different states, Tell your governors, your senators, your members of Congress, your mayors, your state legislators, and urge them to pressure the Trump administration and to speak to your friends and neighbors too to support refugees. Put a sticker on your car, a sign on your window, or in your business that refugees are welcome. It's not enough to feel it in our hearts. We need to take a stand. Second, support your local refugee resettlement agencies. None of these agencies is rich. Provide cash or with guidance, provide in-kind support, in-kind donations. Your gift could make a real difference for a refugee family. Third, if you can hire refugees, give them an opportunity. Imagine that you would give for a chance to earn a living and become self-sufficient after years of depending on the kindness of others. Fourth, be a welcoming neighbor. If you're a member of a church or a social group, consider having a potluck and inviting a refugee family to join you. Let your kids play soccer together, or just smile and say hello. Connect at the human level. More broadly, I invite you to challenge social injustice every day. There is suffering, there is poverty, racism, sexism, xenophobia, and many other forms of injustice. I urge you to keep challenging injustice through your lives. Everyone can contribute, no matter where you were born, what kind of work you do, what kind of religion you practice. Never forget the dignity of the individual forms of foundation of our entire human rights framework. This is a principle enshrined in the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that recognition of the inherent dignity and equal rights all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. We stand at a crossroad when we as a nation can reject or embrace principle. I would argue that to recognize that dignity and to help our neighbors see that dignity both in themselves and in each other, it's one of the most noble things we can do. So I invite you to join this endeavor and be a strong voice for justice, for freedom, and peace. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ava, for doing an excellent job of providing us an overview of our general conference theme here of Principles in Crisis, Refugees and Responsibility. And along with that conference theme, another thing that has brought us together is being the Jesuit Network, the Jesuit Universities Humanitarian Action Network. And so I'd like to invite Father Campbell, our Vice President for Mission here at Holy Cross, to both welcome you to Holy Cross and to introduce you to our next keynote speaker who will be talking about that Jesuit network, Father Mike Sheeran. But first, Father Campbell.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and greetings to all of you. I'm with you today for three reasons. First, I want to welcome you to the campus of the College of the Holy Cross, and I do so knowing that I'm adding my words of welcome to many that you will be hearing today and in the next few days. And please know that I do so not just on my own behalf, but I do so on behalf of Father Philip Burrows, President of the College of the Holy Cross, Father Jim Storms, Rector of our Jesuit community, and the many members of the wider Holy Cross community who are visibly and quietly supporting you here these days. You have significant and meaningful topics to explore, ones that are integral to a Jesuit Catholic liberal arts education, and we are so pleased that you are exploring them here on our campus. Secondly, I've been asked in my welcome to inform you that the St. Joseph Memorial Chapel on campus is open and available to you during the days of your conference, should you wish to step inside for a quiet place to pray. Daily Mass is held at 12:05 p.m. in one of the smaller worship spaces in the lower level, called the McCooey Chapel, and you're welcome to join the community there at prayer, should your schedule allow you to do so. And finally, I have the privilege of introducing a guest speaker whose insights on the topics you are discussing will no doubt inform your conversations in the days ahead. The Reverend Michael J. Sheeran of the Society of Jesus currently serves as president of the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities, the AJCU. a role he has held since 2013. I was able to spend some time with Father Sheeran last night upon his arrival to campus, and if I understood him correctly, this trip is his first visit to the College of the Holy Cross, and he is now able to say that he has been on all 28 campuses of the Jesuit universities and colleges that make up the AJCU. Prior to his role at the AJCU, Father Sheeran was the president of Regis University in Denver from 1993 to 2012, where he had also been academic vice president starting in 1982. He received his doctorate in politics from Princeton University in 1977 and his dissertation on Quaker decision-making, a variant of Jesuit communal discernment, is now a book used by Quakers to teach their method to new members of their community. He has also received honorary doctorates from the University of Denver and from the University of San Francisco. We give a warm welcome to Father Sheeran.
It is good to be at Holy Cross. As one of the Jesuits said to me last night in the Jesuit rec room, "Well, I see you saved the best till last." And I think he was right. I'm here mostly to learn how JUHAN works and to see how AJCU, which you're part of, may be able to help your work. You know, it really struck me recently in reading some early Jesuit documents that JUHAN exemplifies a Jesuit approach to humanitarian service that flows from every human being's common humanity. And it is bolstered by a person's faith, if they have one, whether that faith be Catholic, Presbyterian, Orthodox, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu. It's interesting to note that in 1550, when Ignatius, the founder, wrote a document for the Pope saying, "Here's who I'd like my Jesuits to be," he brought it to the Pope and he said the goal of every Jesuit's life was to build the glory of God. You know that term, the greater glory of God, and the common good. Now, he got glory of God from Christian spirituality. The common good came not from Christianity, but from Cicero, a pagan Roman writer and politician who worked exactly at the level of human beings owe things to each other because they are human. AJCU, the organization that I head and that you're part of, was founded in 1970, so almost 50 years ago, to support the 28 U.S. Jesuit schools as each one of them focused on its local community's educational needs, and then gradually, as they reflected more and more on the community itself, to focus on the needs of the folks on the margins of that civic community. Let me tell you how the organization has grown in its self-understanding over those 50 years, because it really has a lot to do with what you're out to achieve. Initially, AJCU was the Jesuit voice in D.C. for the financial aid needs of the poor students, and with time, of the immigrant communities in each of our towns. We continue to do that. We have a full-time lobbyist, and with the DACA victory of last week, we now turn to the next target, which is a bridge to citizenship for the undocumented students who understand still only have a temporary reprieve. Now, a major development in these last almost 50 years because the professional groups within the 28 schools, the registrars, the business deans, the mission and identity folks, the service learning directors, all wanted to meet annually, share best practices, and talk about how working in a Jesuit school should be different from the same work in a secular institution. AJCU soon found ourselves facilitating the meetings of 35 such conferences, of which JUHAN is one. It's a paradox, you know, when you come to Marquette to be the registrar, you have probably worked your way up in the registrar business by having 3 or 4 jobs at other places. You get to Marquette, and now you're in charge, and you kind of know the business, but you don't know anything about the tradition of the place you've come. And what I've begun to find when I talk to the folks in that situation is they'll say, oh, I knew it was a different attitude towards students, but I didn't know why. I thought my people treated each other really in a way we never have done in the other places I've worked, but I didn't know why. And that's the time when you help people to understand what it means to exemplify in their office, in their way of living, the values that underlie Jesuit education and that kind of respect for the neighbor that goes all the way back to Ignatius. Now, the Ignatian spirituality issues began to grow next. And so individual schools started doing workshops for their faculty and their staff who came with doctorates typically from major institutions outside the Jesuit sphere. And what they wanted to do in those schools was to help them understand that your job when you're teaching history is not only to teach objectively and accurately, but it's also to be aware of the Ignatian questions about meaning in life and see how those have been dealt with through the years in different settings. What we found was that our programs were spotty. We would have one real expert in a particular city, but we really needed 3 or 4 presenters to do a good job on a good workshop. And so that has become a national enterprise where the very best folks from our schools are brought in to work with new faculty, new staff, and help them to broaden their own understanding of what the job is to teach or to work in a Jesuit institution. And in a sense, where the typical thing they were trained to do with their faculty in most doctoral programs was to inform, people learn how, oh, the goal of a Jesuit school is, yes, to inform, but as well in the process to form by the questions we ask and the expectations we raise. And so we have national ventures now. The big one handles 55 a year, and there have been about 500 people now who have gone through that in the last 10 years. It's called the Ignatian Colleagues Program. And these folks are now in their schools where they particularly are working as volunteers in orientation programs, in search committees, in being mentors to young faculty or to young staff with the idea of sharing that culture. Recently, AJCU has gotten a new duty. You may have heard that last fall the Jesuits elected a new Father General. That's the boss man in Rome. And when they elect a new general, his name is Sosa, Father Sosa from Venezuela, they also give him and the order a kind of a set of mandates, and this time there were just two major documents. But the mandate coming out of this, what's called the 36th General Congregation, was we are so convinced of the value that happens when people who are on faculty and staff in our schools work together across a country like the US and like South America. What we want next is to capitalize on that and to devise what they call a network of networks to tie things together among the different regional organizations. There's 5 or 6 of them, I think, so that they can do a better job of research and analysis on issues like global warming, systemic economic injustices, internally displaced persons, as we heard a little bit about, immigration. So they encourage those associations like AJCU to get together and do this network of networks. And here's the way we're doing this now, and I want you to know about it because some of this can be of help to what you're doing and may give you ideas about what we can do for you. First, we have research listservs now on immigration for scholars and practitioners between Jesuit universities in North and South America. This includes password-protected exchanges so that if a faculty member has done a project and written the first draft of a paper, she can send that to somebody with expertise, another faculty member in Chile, to get that person to critique whether the first person really has caught what the issues are in terms of internal migration, external migration, economic troubles across borders. The expansion of that will go now worldwide gradually. We already have online education going on of various types among the higher ed institutions of the United States, but now also of India and Africa, and reaching now for the first time into refugee groups in Europe. Some of the American Jesuit schools, it's as simple as if you are in Africa and a faculty member without the right degree or learning to be a master teacher of a high school, you give that person an empty seat in the online higher ed master's degree program that your school runs. In other cases, Jesuit Worldwide Learning has infrastructure and content and courseware that was designed for the refugee camps in Africa and is now being spread wherever there are refugees around the world. That was all designed by one unit of AJCU. And that is what's the effort that is growing. There's joint Jesuit study abroad years now being explored, where students from one country like the US are immersed for a semester or a whole year in a slum or barrio in another country while taking appropriate courses and being mentored by faculty and staff at the local Jesuit university in the second country. So Loyola Marymount has a program going right now with the Javeriana in Bogota, Colombia. And the students have a serious immersion experience. They have faculty who are bilingual in most cases, and they have courses that are tailored to their particular needs and what their experiences are there. So it's a few places in the US and Latin America, but it's also getting started between Jesuit universities in Japan, Sophia, in Korea, Sogang, in some units of universities in Australia, and so on. Now, AJCU is tiny but mighty, Our staff is really tiny. We have 4 people in the Washington office. So, and as you would guess, our money is limited. We found the best thing we can often do is to offer you the names of the people you're trying to find, so you have contact people throughout the worldwide Jesuit system. The website is set up, as I mentioned before, with some things password protected for confidentiality, and also so that no one can say, oh, that article already appeared on the net. Don't be afraid to use us. Ms. Deanna Howes is our communications director. She graduated from Fordham 9 years ago, and she keeps our 40 to 50 listservs pretty much up to date. Dr. Stephanie Russell, our Vice President for Support of Ignatian Mission and Spirituality, offers a lot of Ignatian programs. They're tailored to a particular group's needs. She has done workshops for students. She was 15 years Mission and Identity Director at Marquette. She has done major programs for faculty groups as they figured out how do we want to reform our curriculum to fit with this place being more effectively Jesuit. And she's done workshops for trustees who very often think, oh, they asked me to be here because they need my donation. And the answer to that mindset is, sorry, friend, that's not the idea. You've got to understand what a Jesuit school is all about. After all, you're the one who's got to be deciding who the next president here is going to be. So she does those things as well. I guess you could say that's the commercial, friends, but what I was trying to do is to give you a sketch of who we are and the ways in which we are here to help an organization like JUHAN. I'd like to close, though, with 2 thoughts, and I should mention maybe, because I know your time is going to be packed, I'll stick around, but we won't do questions after this. If anybody wants to chat about anything, I'll be around this afternoon and into the evening. But 2 thoughts. First, the present holders of power in Washington think that America becomes great again when we put profit and low taxes ahead of people on the margins. Whether that's inside the country when we're talking about reform of health care, or outside the country when we're talking about just who can come as an immigrant, and so many other ways. There's a hidden positive outcome that I hope you'll notice and promote. There's suddenly a growing sense of personal responsibility, I find, around this country, as people realize the government isn't going to do it, I better do my part. And so volunteerism, you see out of that coming things like the efforts of smaller governments, California, the different cities, to say if the feds aren't going to do climate change, we're going to make sure it happens by dealing really with cutting all of the pollution that we're throwing out into the air. And at the same time, if you were in Washington as I was, just after the inauguration, when you saw the huge number of women that far outstripped everybody who was at the inauguration, you know committed people are working for change in all kinds of invisible but really effective ways. Take that to heart, find those people, and see if you can find common cause. The second thing that goes with that is that, I shouldn't say the second thing that goes with it, something that flows out of that is one of the great ironies. We are now in a situation in Washington where gridlock is our friend. The passage of any new legislation right now is almost always going to be at the expense of the poor, the undocumented, the person of a religion that feels alien to us who've been in America a while. And so shifting from Obamacare to Trump care will take away health coverage from millions. And the majority party's financial aid proposals being discussed, they're going to be touted as, we're going to make it so much simpler, we're going to cut out so much red tape, you just fill out a form and we'll send you a note back telling you what your aid package is. However, oh yes, if you push, they say, yes, we are going to save so much money there, you should be very focused on that. And don't notice the fact that we're also going to radically cut the amount of financial aid that's available to everybody, but that will be especially felt by the poor. That's the game plan. And I'll tell you, the person to keep an eye on is Senator Lamar Alexander, to whom the majority party in both houses defers as the expert. So if you see what he's saying and get underneath it, you'll get a good sense of where things are going should there be new legislation. And that's why I say no legislation right now is probably better than destructive legislation. And disagreement among legislators within the majority party sometimes translates into the paradox that gridlock becomes our friend. If they can't change the law, they can't take away the provisions of different kinds of financial aid. They can cut the amounts, maybe, but if they're frustrated enough, they'll do what they did about, I think it was 3 weeks ago, and do a continuing resolution to get through another year, and that means the money stays the same. Now, the other thing I want to mention to you, I'd suggest you think about the difference as this meeting goes on between visiting a foreign country as a tourist and as a pilgrim. I went in 1973 one time to Chiang Mai in Thailand and stayed at this little school where Montagnard village leaders, people who had lived remotely for centuries in the mountains, which had recently, meaning like 100 years before, been divided by a border between Thailand and Vietnam, where those people lived and came from, and where they wandered across that border on and on forever. And they had been brought together in this Thai government-sponsored school, where they were shown for the first time a map that showed them the borders of Thailand and announced to them how proud they should be because they were citizens of Thailand and had been, and their grandparents had been, even if they didn't know it. And of course, that meant that they lived in Thailand now, and so they should obey the nation's laws, give up their migratory life, stop going back and forth across that border. And as I was there, people were very polite, but they had been there for a few weeks. And they were confused, and they were angry as they realized that their culture was being simply ignored. And I remember walking around in a village that was supposed to be a display of their community way of life. And I remember walking through this one supposedly public room and stumbling over an old man who was rolled up into a blanket as he slept off this new thing called dope. And I really felt a plight that I could do at the moment very little to change. But feeling it changed me. It has motivated me as an educator in what I have pushed for in curriculum for the rest of my life. the tourist looks through the plate glass window of an air-conditioned bus and safely observes the culture beyond the window. The tourist doesn't smell the smells, feel the heat, share the pain. The tourist may even buy souvenirs in a fixed-price shop. That's safe, you know. In contrast, St. Ignatius, even when his job in later life was to sit in Rome at a desk and run this new thing called the Jesuit order, he always called himself in his spiritual notes the pilgrim. Earlier, he had made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and he had walked all over Europe in times of war and saw his whole life as pilgrimage. But now, at the end, he didn't make much in the way of travel outside Rome. Friends, life is supposed to be a pilgrimage. Give up the safety of the tour bus. Immerse yourself in the communities and cultures that don't have things so well. Become driven by the chance to help people on the margins be truly included. Yeah, you may stumble occasionally. You may end up with a scar or two. But you will become the human being God saw in you when He made you. Be like Ignatius, please, a pilgrim through life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Father Sheeran, for sharing that with us. And thank you, Father Campbell and Ms. Millona, for welcoming us to JUHAN and getting us off to a great start. So before we go to the next session, I just have a few announcements to make to talk a little bit about some things you should know about, and then I'll go over the afternoon. So first, on your table, I just wanted you to take note of the reading materials that are there. You'll find an article about Worcester. As Professor Kennedy said in his remarks, Worcester is the largest resettlement city in Massachusetts, so there's some interesting facts about the refugees and immigrants who come to this city specifically. You'll find an article about humanitarianism. This has some fast facts, some definitions, things like that, to get you a little bit of knowledge about the field itself. And then you'll find a booklet entitled Worcester, a Welcoming City. So as you spend time in the ballroom, I would just encourage you to read these materials to get a better sense of Worcester, of the humanitarianism field, and to get you all talking with each other about what inspires you and why you're here. And we ask that you leave these copies on the table so that everybody can enjoy them. And I'll also point out in your conference folder, another way to get to know each other is we have conference bingo. So we ask that you find a different person for each box. And if you fill out your whole sheet, come find me and we'll talk about something exciting. And then I want to mention that tomorrow morning, I'll explain a little bit more about how the signups are going to work for the buses for going out to Worcester tomorrow night, and then for the community partner visits on Thursday. There's some information in your booklet about what those two events are, and we're going to be shuttling you all on buses, so it's very important that you sign up for those. The sign-up sheets are on the table outside, so if you know what you're doing, feel free to sign up for them now, but I'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow morning. Another thing I want to mention is social media. I've already seen some great pictures being taken, so please use the hashtag JUHAN2017 so we can follow you. And then also JUHAN has a Facebook page, so please like that Facebook page. Another thing I'll mention is that you'll notice that there's some empty tables in the back and outside. These are for the community partners who will be coming and sharing their organizations and some information with you. We have a couple who are here only today, so Catholic Relief Services and Oxfam, so be sure to talk to them in your spare time because the people won't be here tomorrow. The materials will be, but the people won't, so make sure to talk to them, and then the other tables will fill up tomorrow. So it's currently 1:35, and at 2 p.m. our next sessions start. So you have the option of picking one of two sessions. The first is a session entitled Humanitarianism 101, which Professor Kennedy will be talking about. So it's definitely an introductory session. It will just introduce you a little bit to the field, some common terms, definitions. So I encourage you to check that out if you want sort of an introduction to that. And then the other option is Julia McPherson, who is over there, from JRS, Jesuit Refugee Service, is going to talk a little bit about her organization and also do a debrief of the simulation that some of you participated in this morning. So go to that if you want to unpack a little bit about what happened, how you felt, what you learned, and to learn a little bit more about JRS. You can certainly attend that session if you didn't do the simulation, because it's going to be more than the debrief, but that will be included in that. Then after that, you'll come back to this room at 2:45. We're going to have a panel on careers and humanitarianism. Then we'll have the breakout sessions and dinner, and then we have a movie night tonight, which we'll talk a little bit about later, but the movie is Salam Neighbor, and that movie theater is below Kimball Dining Hall. So that's the afternoon. I'll be back up with some more announcements later, but enjoy the rest of your time. So you have about 15 minutes before you need to head upstairs and pick your session. So thank you again, and thank you so much for a great morning. Thank you.